Hello and welcome to Saturday Agenda as we look back at the issues of the week. On the program, helping me to do just that, Kieran Walsh from the Sun Herald, Josh Gordon from the Age newspaper and David Pemberthy from the Punch. Great to see you all, guys. Thanks for your time. Kieran, I want to ask you first of all, the outcomes of the climate talks in Italy. How good was that for the Prime Minister? How good a look was it to be seen up alongside Obama and co, and what did you make of the outcomes of it?
Well, clearly the Prime Minister loves to be in that sort of company and he loves to be feted, he loves to be applauded. This is, I mean, he's happy as a pig in mud is a phrase that comes to mind here. Considering that this Global Capture and Storage Institute has been, this is the third time basically it's been announced. It was announced first off in September last year, then it was re-announced by the Prime Minister in April, and now it's been announced again on a world stage. He's getting a hell of a lot of mileage out of it. Yeah,
Josh, he has certainly announced this one a number of times, but this one in particular does look like it's got him a lot of praise. And to be honest, standing alongside Obama and getting a slap on the back's quite a good look.
It certainly is. I mean, I reckon he's definitely got a fair shake of the sauce bottle on this, as Kieran pointed out. And really, there isn't a lot of substance in any of this sort of stuff. There's an in-principle agreement to cut emissions by 60% by 2050 and an in-principle agreement to limit temperature increases to 2 degrees. But really, it's a bit of hot air until anything of substance happens, I think.
Excuse the pun on that.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah. Dave Pemberthy at the Punch. Dave, none of these agreements are binding. India and China have committed to nothing at this point. So really, what does it mean? I think Josh makes a fair point there.
Oh, look, I don't really think that it means anything, and that's certainly not a criticism of Kevin Rudd. But as you say, none of the stuff in the communique is binding. It's all fairly woolly-headed stuff that is 41 years away from July 2009. So there's plenty of wiggle room for people to get out of this, particularly for countries like India and China, which are going like a bull at a gate. So I wouldn't be... the world should not be holding hands and singing Kumbaya about this as some kind of seismic breakthrough, I wouldn't have thought.
No, I think that's a fair point. And the US President Obama, he spoke after the summit and made it clear that there is a long way to go. Let's hear what the US President had to say.
It is no small task for 17 leaders to bridge their differences on an issue like climate change. We each have our national priorities and politics to contend with, and any steps we agree to here are intended to support and not replace the main UN negotiations with more than 190 countries. It's even more difficult in the context of a global recession.
And Kieran, the problem for Obama is, the Europeans want him to do more and commit to more, but he's struggling to get, even the modest plans that he's got through the US Congress.
Yes, that's right. And I think from our point of view, from the Australian point of view, you've got to marvel at the Prime Minister's audacity in a whole range of areas. But in this area in particular, it is that he can go and talk about, it's almost sort of 5 minutes to midnight and we've got to get cracking and all the rest. I mean, this is the government that delayed its own legislation, that has found it very difficult to negotiate its way through opposition in the Senate. And, you've got to say that the whole thing hasn't been handled that well here in Australia, and yet internationally he's been seen, he's lauded and applauded and all the rest of it. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, indeed. Well, lauded and applauded by most people, not the UN chief Ban Ki-moon. Let's hear what he had to say.
The policies that they have stated so far is not enough, is not sufficient enough to meet the target as the scientists of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have suggested. This is the science. We must work according to the science. This is politically and morally imperative and historic responsibility for the leaders, for the future of humanity.
Someone forgot to give Ban Ki-moon the script, Dave.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But look, that's the kind of thing you can say easily when you don't actually have a specific country to represent. And the UN General Secretary finds himself in the happy position of not having a Traralgon not having an iron triangle, not having a Hunter Valley, where the job would fall to him as it would to Kevin Rudd if he went headlong down the path that some of the climate purists are urging him to follow, where he'd have to go up and tell, communities numbering tens of thousands, blue-collar blokes who've been working in this industry for generations, that due to what some people still regard as a bit of a faddish sort of inner-city sort of issue, they've all got to get jobs running bed and breakfasts or working for the vaunted wind farms that are apparently about to replace coal mining in the Hunter Valley. So if you're the head of the UN, you don't have to worry about getting, turfed out by key marginal electorates in coal mining parts of the country.
No, that's right. And the other point is, Josh, David points to the domestic constituency here. What about China, India, these places, impoverished parts of those countries, just finally, making a quid, and the developed world saying, sorry guys, ease up?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy for some of these developing nations. They've said to the West, look, you guys have, you've developed, you've got lots of cars and flat screen TVs, and you live in big houses, and, you look at the US, and in per capita terms, they're by far the biggest energy consumers in the world. They're the biggest energy consumers in the world anyway. Chinese people per person consume just a tiny fraction of what the US consumes. So I've got some sympathy when India says, look, we'll cut back on emissions, but we want to be able to increase them on a per person basis a little bit, and I think that's reasonable in some ways. I mean, I think to borrow Ross Garnaut's phrase, the politics of this are sort of diabolical in a lot of ways, both domestically, as David pointed out, and internationally. How do you get China and India on board? Because, in some ways I think there's a lot of truth to the claim that there's no point pressing ahead unless you do get these two big emitters to come into the tent.
Kerry-Ann Walsh, I suppose what they've done here as well, the leaders, is, that's one point, the China-India factor, but what about the fact that the commitments they've made are for 2050, nothing for 2020, so the things that are around the corner, they don't want to touch just yet.
That's right, and that's why you've got to say this is an exercise in international relations. I'm not saying that that the bottom line isn't and the goal isn't good, but when you're punting these sorts of targets well off into the distance, and the governments and the leaders of nations that are sitting around crafting this sort of stuff for the feel-good domestic political audience, then they're not going to be around in 2050. They're not going to be around probably in another 3 or 4 years, a lot of them. So really, it's a win-win situation for them. They don't have to sign up or commit themselves to anything on behalf of their countries, and certainly not risk their necks politically to do anything. So you've always got to say, when they're punting this far into the distance, really, what's this all about? A massive public relations exercise. Probably there's some truth to that. OK,
stay with us after the break on Saturday Agenda. We're going to look at the detention of an Australian citizen in China.